Welcome everyone to our first Sphero session of the fall. So happy that you're spending some time with us and that you're taking time after hours to really perfect your craft. We love hanging out. So hope you find it useful. And sorry about the chat. I'll keep trying to figure that out once we get started. But yes, just some information before we get started. The Sphero session is 45 minutes long, and we will be recording it and send you an email afterward with the recording link and a link to the slide deck so you can click on all the links. Your audio is muted and camera is off. Since this is a webinar, this chat does not apply for now, but I'm going to be working on it. If you have anything you want to ask, go ahead and ask it in the Q&A for now. And then at the end of this Sphero session, we will be giving away a Bolt or an Indie to a participant who is present. So stay tuned for that. I am Cassie. I'm the marketing manager here at Sphero and the facilitator of these Sphero sessions. And today joining us is Meaghan, who is one of our Sphero heroes. She's going to be talking about design thinking, and Adrienne, who's on the Sphero team, is going to be talking to us about the Socratic method. Meaghan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Meaghan Creamer. I work in a classroom that works with students ranging from 4-year-olds up until 5th grade. It's a related arts classroom, so I see each classroom one time each week. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, went to college in Rhode Island, and then came to Vanderbilt for grad school, where I studied maker spaces and how they are designed to foster a community of practice to continue learning. For not only the students, but also the people who are mentors in the space. And yeah, I love all things making, all things maker spaces. I love Sphero, and for fun, I play Ultimate Frisbee.
Thanks for being here, Meaghan. Adrienne, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Adrienne Emerson. I'm an education content creator here at Sphero. Before that, I was a high school educator for 13 years. I taught math, engineering, robotics, coached robotics clubs and competition teams. Meaghan and I just found out we grew up about an hour away from each other. I am originally from Rochester, New York, and moved down to Dallas, Texas in 2009, where I still live. And I am excited to talk to you guys today about design and Socratic questioning.
Thank you, Adrienne. All right, to kick it off, Meaghan's going to talk to us about Sphero and design thinking.
Thanks, Cassie. So in my classroom, like Cassie said, I'm going to talk about combining Sphero products and design thinking. And the way I'm going to do that is I'll go just a brief overview of which Sphero products I've used in my classroom for this activity, and what the design thinking model is that I use in my classroom. Then I'll go into which, I'll just show you all the design thinking model, walk you through it. Then I'll show you an example of a specific lesson that I do with my students here, that y'all are welcome to take and make your own. And then I will give you 3 takeaways at the end for Sphero and design thinking in your classroom. So to start off, the main Sphero product I'm going to be focusing on is the Sphero Indie, which is their robot that is geared towards younger learners. But I will say this lesson is very much so applicable for all of the Sphero products, the Bolt, the Mini, and the RVR, and the Indie, whatever you have available to you in your classroom. But this is going to specifically focus on Indie, but just translate it to whatever robot you have, combined with the design thinking model. So on the right side, you will see it says design thinking at I Wonder. I Wonder is just the name of my classroom at the school where I'm located in Nashville. And this is a model that we have created for our classroom. So the students begin, and the design thinking process is a way of thinking through solving problems. I always say it's something that engineers commonly use, but people and humans are solving problems all day long. So whether or not you identify as an engineer, you are likely an engineer at some point in your life as you solve problems. This specifically focuses on humanizing people. So we empathize, we interview people with questions, then you define the problem. What are we going to create? Which problem are we going to focus on? Moves you into the ideating phase, which is where you come up with all sorts of ideas of how you can solve that problem. Moves into the prototyping phase, where you are hands-on creating, whether it be with cardboard, a 3D printer, whatever you have access to in your classroom or in life, and then to testing your solution to the problem. Now you'll see that arrow that is in a red box is highlighted, and then it goes back in a system. That is because engineers and people in life, we solve problems and it may not work, the solution you've come up with. So you might have to go back to the idea board, which is the thought behind why ours is designed as such. Now that arrow is in a red box because there is a strong emotion students and people feel when they go from the testing phase back to the ideating phase, and that is the feeling of failure or when something does not work. So on the next slide, you're going to see that when we use indie in the classroom, it allows us the opportunity to practice that emotion we feel throughout that phase between testing when we go back to ideating, when we feel the failure and we don't know what to do with it. On the left, those are two students that were in pre-K, and you'll see if you've used indie before, you may have recognized this, but their algorithm on the floor there goes from green to pink to purple to blue. The way they have set up that algorithm is going to fail. Indy will begin driving on green, but then the color pink causes Indy to turn. Therefore, the car, Indy, will not reach the purple square, which causes it to turn around and celebrate, which I know was the goal of these two students. They wanted it to go from green to pink to purple. So they're going to fail. And I watched this moment and I took this picture and I watched it happen, and the car went zooming the other way into the girl with the headband's hand. And instead of saying, I know what you need to do. You need to take this purple pad and move it because pink means turn. You let the failure happen, and then you can bring it back to that design thinking model by saying the explicit words. I see you're in the testing phase. I notice you're testing out your algorithm. I wonder what will happen if we go back to coming up with some ideas of how this algorithm can be successful. Students as young as 4 years old can learn the words if you use them with frequency and put them in context and then explicitly later teach them. So that by the time those pre-K students are getting into second grade and I'm going over the prototyping or the testing phase, they have felt that emotion and they've heard me explicitly say the testing phase going back to the idea phase. Now on the right side, there's a video that Cassie's going to play twice. The first time, just go ahead and watch it. And the second time, I want you to notice all of the different pieces that these students are using with their indie. Okay, you're good, Cassie. So you'll see their code was successful. They're using indie, created a successful algorithm. Now look at how they set it up and the resources they're using. Awesome, thanks. So when the students learn this failure and we explicitly talk about design thinking as they're feeling that failure, we then can also combine other materials to make these lessons very interesting and super fun for the kids. So if you go to the next slide, Cassie, I'm going to show you all a sample lesson that I will do in the class here. And y'all feel free, if you're welcome to use anything you see here. So I welcome them into class and we have a picture. And that is a picture of other students in my classroom doing a very similar activity. And I just say, what do you see? What do you notice? Maybe the students will talk about the algorithm being successful or failure, or making a prediction. I don't know where it goes, but it's awesome, especially for English language learners, if you have them in your class, to just ask the question as simple as, what do you see in this photo? What's happening? We then move on to the objective, where I state explicitly what we will be learning in this lesson, which for this one is I can code Indie to go through Make Do, which is a tool I'll talk about in a second, and I can be an engineer. We move into engineering. What even is that? We talk about how engineers are people. People experience failure all the time. People have problems all the time. And it's important to celebrate that and hug the emotion of failure that we feel through that process. I then show them the materials they'll be using for the day, which in this case was Indie, Make Do. Make Do are screws that you can use to combine cardboard to each other. So that's how they built that arch in that last video you saw. Scissors, and then things called clever cutters, which are really awesome ways to cut cardboard safely. And then I give them the design challenge. This is the bulk. It's wide open. Their whole challenge is I can code Indie to go through Make Do, to go through something they've created out of cardboard. They have 20 minutes to do it. The students go in groups and they do it. And the most important part of the design thinking and Indie coming together is walking around and me noticing in real time those connections, saying, oh, I noticed you've made your product, your algorithm. Now we need to test it. Oh, did your test fail? How does that feel? What are we going to do to get you back in the ideating phase so that you can test it again? Use that language frequently, often, and in the moment where you see it happening so that students can remember it. And especially when you refer to it in later years, they're like, oh, I remember, like, I've heard that word test a bunch of times, and we can explicitly talk about it. Then the next part, which I always tell the students is my favorite, is reflection, which is when we talk about what we've done and just what did you learn? How are you an engineer? How did it feel when you failed today? Who brought you up when you were feeling down? Just any open-ended questions to get the students thinking about what they've just done, which I know Adrienne will add on to in hers part of this presentation. And then you close it out, bring it back to the objectives. What was the goal of the lesson? So throughout this, though there is no picture of the design thinking process, it can be embedded into your lessons with the language that you decide to use as you are going around your classroom while the learning is occurring. Cassie, if you go to the next one, I just wanted to give y'all a couple explicit takeaways from this design thinking portion. You'll see on the left, that is the design thinking process we use. I encourage you to reflect on your classroom, create it alongside students, do it with your fellow faculty, whatever you prefer, but create a design thinking model specifically for your classroom that your students will feel identity in. Because I, as a person, have my own design thinking model than teachers that I work with. But it's important that I have one to fall back on. Second thing is refer explicitly to the part of the model as students are coding a Sphero robot. So as you see that failure happening, say, oh, wow, you just tested your algorithm, back to the ideating phase. You're using the words that are in your classroom's design thinking model. And the third thing is to ask questions when your students have created an algorithm that fails. It's uncomfortable. Step back, watch the failure, and while you're watching, prepare a question to ask the students to get them thinking about how they're going to debug or change their algorithm for whatever robot they may be coding. They'll give information at the end. If y'all feel free to reach out if you have any questions or resources you'd like. I am happy to share and talk all things making. I love makerspaces.
Thank you so much, Meaghan. Loved taking that and putting it with a specific example. Very inspiring. Thank you. And next, we're going to hand it to Adrienne to talk about the Socratic method.
Thank you, Cassie. So everything that Meaghan said was so valuable. And I think one of the biggest things to take away from that is there are so many versions of the design thinking or design process, and just being able to create your own that you use. And none of them are incorrect or wrong. It's just whatever works for you and your students is what's best. Because I have another example of an engineering design process in my part of the presentation to talk to you about Socratic questioning with. And so all of these topics are kind of interrelated. So one of the topics that goes along really well with the design process thinking is Socratic questioning. And a lot of you may have heard of this before, you may not have heard of it before, but I guarantee you that all of you have done it in your classroom at some point. It might not be as formalized as some of the things I'm going to present today, but Socratic questioning is just thoughtful questioning that can help students examine their ideas more logically and either validate or possibly invalidate those ideas. So for example, when Meaghan was using Indie, and she showed that picture of the girls whose course didn't work correctly the first time. And she said, I didn't say, oh, move that purple mat over because it's going to turn. She started with a question for her students. And so thoughtful questions like that can really help students kind of discover learning on their own instead of being directed by a teacher. So engineering and programming assignments that you would very often do with Sphero products really lend themselves to this type of questioning, and it can really be beneficial as you're going through that design process with your students to help them really validate their thinking, or maybe change their thinking a little bit and how they're solving problems. I like to call this, in my classroom, it was when I was playing dumb. So anytime a student was presented me with something they were working on, or I was kind of reviewing their work in the middle of them completing a project, I would just kind of play dumb and really try and pull out from the students an explanation to what their assumptions were in solving that problem, so I could either confirm, or so they could help themselves either like confirm their assumptions or disprove some of their assumptions. So moving ahead to the design process. So again, this is one of the processes that this is one that we made at Sphero. It's really very similar to the one that Meaghan showed earlier. We have define the problem, ask why is this a problem, imagine potential solutions that are in the real world, planning, prototyping, testing, improving. And this is a circular process, so you can go jump back and forth between any of the steps at any points. So if you're using, say, a bolt, and you are trying to program that bolt to go through a specific path, maybe it's through a maze that you created, maybe it's a path over one of the code mats. Defining the problem is always the first step. So getting the students to be able to, in 1 to 2 sentences, state exactly the problem that they're trying to solve. And then in the engineering design process, when you are maybe creating something, so in Meaghan's example, creating something out of cardboard that your indie can go through, maybe when you're aging up some of these lessons, it's, hey, create a bridge that your bolt or your indie have to go over without collapsing. And so, why would you want to have a bridge that you can go over without collapsing? Well, because you don't want, all your little people and indie to fall over the bridge or something like that. And then as you go through imagining real world solutions, planning out your execution, prototyping and testing again, all of these steps in your process, you can be asking your students, kind of probing the play dumb questions to kind of get more information out of them to just help and secure their learning. So moving on to the type of groups of questioning that Socratic questioning has in it, it is separated into these 7 types of questioning, which we're going to look at examples for each of these types in the next few slides. But all of these types kind of really tend to lend themselves to different parts of the engineering process. So clarification and questions about the initial issue, these types of questionings really lend themselves to those first 2 steps of the engineering design process. So the defining the problem and asking why it is a problem. So if you can ask your students questions about why they would be solving this problem or what the assumptions they made about the initial problem are, sometimes you can actually help students that maybe are taking a little bit of a left turn right at the beginning. And if they kept going on that turn, eventually at the end of the assignment, they would be way off base. You can kind of steer them back on course with some of these questionings if some of their initial assumptions are maybe just kind of out there or maybe have missed the mark a little bit. Then the next 2 types of Socratic questioning, assumptions and reason and evidence. These type of questions can really help in the imagine and planning stages of the design process. So challenging the assumptions that other products in the real world have already solved this problem or a type of this problem. Challenging those with, and then looking at the reasons and evidence for those, again, can really be helpful. And then towards the end of the design process, origin and source questioning, implication and consequence, and viewpoints get really helpful. So maybe they've come up with a solution to the problem, but they haven't thought about how it impacts everybody that could be using their solution. So let's look at a couple examples from these types of questioning. So when you're looking for clarification on a problem that students are trying to solve, a couple examples of that could be, what do you mean by, and fill in the blank with something that the students have said to you. So if you are having them design a solution to something and you ask them, what their solution is, you could maybe ask them, what did you mean by this part of your explanation of your solution? And then another good one in clarification is, could you expand on that? So these can be really general questions or they can be very specific. But I think about this one, the could you expand on that, as like when you have really young kids that just keep asking, every time you give an answer, they just keep asking why. So, oh, the sky is blue. Why? Oh, because, and you keep going and keep going and keep going. So asking students to just expand on their line of thinking, sometimes lead them down a path that's really helpful to, again, validate or invalidate their thinking. Questions about the initial issue is the next category. A good question for that is like, why is this important? So if you are solving a problem where something as simple as Bolt being able to navigate its way through a maze that you've created, why is that important to a student? It could be that they want to learn about programming. It could be that they want to understand how, Bolt takes direction from the programming device. Lots of different answers could come up, but why is this an important problem to solve for them? And then assumptions. Assumptions, are the big thing in a lot of engineering and STEM classrooms. When we look at a problem, a lot of the problems we're looking at are not unique or have already tried to or have been solved before. So your students will usually come in with assumptions about anything that you present to them. So asking them what those assumptions are that they had, what are other assumptions they could make that maybe they're not making? Or you could reframe it a little bit differently in, you seem to be assuming, fill in the blank, do I understand that correctly? And again, these are all questions just to get the student talking and thinking. And a lot of times this will lead them to validate their own assumptions, but sometimes it won't. And that is both of those situations are a really good thing. Next examples, Cassie. So here's some other examples. For reason and evidence type, what led you to this belief? Or is there reason to doubt that evidence? And then going through origin, is this your idea or did you hear it from somebody else? This is always my favorite one with high schoolers, because you either get the students who every single idea that they've ever had is totally their own, or every single idea they have had, they couldn't tell you where it came from, but it wasn't theirs originally. So I used to love to ask that question because I would get answers all over the map, and they were usually really helpful. And then one of my other favorite types of questioning to ask is in this implication and consequence section. If you implemented this idea, what else could happen as a result? A lot of times when students are solving a problem, they get tunnel vision, where they see their solution as the only solution and as only a benefit. And so the example I use a lot of times is cell phones. Cell phones have tons of benefits. I'm sure when they made the first smartphone, they saw all of the benefits of having all of this information in your pocket at all times, and being able to call anybody from anywhere is a huge benefit. But some of the things that maybe were not thought of during that development is how it would impact classrooms, how it would impact the use of other technology, how it would basically devalue other pieces of technology. So always love to get kids to look at what are some of the other implications of their solutions or ideas. And then viewpoint as well. How would other groups of people respond to this question? So just because they respond in a certain way, maybe you know, somebody from a different background would respond differently. If it's a problem they're trying to solve, we used to do a project in my classroom around public transportation in cities, and that might look very different in an urban environment versus a rural environment. So what are the viewpoints that they haven't thought of, and what are some other responses they could get if they ask different groups of people? So tips for using Socratic questioning in your classroom. Again, I think as I walked through this, most of you, even if you had never heard of this before, have probably asked these questions in your classroom. But if you really want to ensure that you are working through the different steps of the Socratic questioning and hitting all of the types, have a list of questions ready. If you Google Socratic questioning, you're going to come out with tons of printouts of examples of Socratic questioning and all things and stuff like all sorts of resources. You don't even necessarily have to create them on your own. So you can have just a list of general questions ready to go. If you're working on a specific project that you want to be able to incorporate questioning in, you can also take those general examples and make yourself a list of very specific questions for that project that you're working on. Next tip is to embrace the awkward silence. A lot of kids are not used to being questioned about their ideas and about their work. And sometimes it may take them a minute to be able to form an opinion on the question that you're answering or asking them. Or just, you know, they might be caught off guard and they might not have thought of it like that before. So embrace the awkward silence. I usually give them about 30 seconds or so of silence. And then if they're really struggling to come up with an answer, I'll either move on to a different question or I'll try to rephrase it for them. Next thing that's really important with Socratic questioning is to follow up. So instead of just moving from question to question to question that's on your list, following up with their responses can be a great way to probe deeper and to really get to the reasoning behind their assumptions and their thoughts and the reasoning behind their solution to the problem that they've been presented with. Another tip for this is to ask questions to a group. Sometimes it can be really intimidating for one student to kind of have to answer all of these questions in a row by themselves. So sometimes asking these questions in a group can be a little less intimidating because a couple different people can chime in. Maybe that starts the discussion and the thinking for other people in the group, and then it becomes a group discussion rather than kind of this one-on-one situation where kids could get a little nervous. And then also really important when you're working on a project, even if you're not using Socratic questioning, to just remind them at the end of the project to summarize in writing all of the key points that came up as they were solving this problem. In the engineering design process that I presented, there wasn't a place for like documentation, but I've seen a lot of design processes that do have that in there. But documentation and reflection at the end of any assignment where you're going through this like design thinking process is really important, just to solidify the learning and the thinking in the students' minds. So I think that about wraps up my section, and I will hand it back to Cassie.
Thank you, Adrienne. And it sounds like the silence part, a lot of people liked that affirmation that it's good. So thank you so much. We're at our Q&A portion. I noticed a few questions that we'll go through. If you have any questions for Meaghan or Adrienne, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have left before the giveaway. The first question, which I think was for you, Adrienne, but Meaghan, feel free to chime in as well, is what is the difference between hypothesis and assumptions?
I can go ahead and take a crack at that. So a hypothesis is really like a statement, a prediction statement. So what do you think is going to happen? Whereas assumptions are all of the background knowledge that a student or a teacher or anybody would be bringing into that situation. So I guess they could be related in that students would use their assumptions about a situation to create a hypothesis. That makes sense.
Thank you very much. And then what grade level would you start with Socratic thinking? And I think this might be a good one after you answer for Meaghan to talk about with design thinking as well, which I think.
Yeah, I think Socratic questioning, when you kind of go through all of the steps and really get in depth, is probably more of a, I don't know, middle school to high school, but I think you can start that questioning at a much younger age, but maybe you just start with one or two of the questions. You don't probe quite as deeply, but you just start that line of thinking early.
Yeah, I would similarly, but a different time frame. I would say design thinking. You can start doing hands-on projects whenever your kids seem ready. We start in third grade with a real life problem solving project. But like I said, starting with pre-K, I start talking about the language and things the students are going to need in order to understand that design thinking process when it's time to truly use it and go through it to solve problems.
Our next question is, how big of a group would you suggest for either Indy or Bolt? Maybe Meaghan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can do, for Indy, I think you can have up to 4 or up to 5, really. Anything past 5 is going to be a little bit more difficult. I also think it's very helpful if you do have a group with higher numbers, like 4 or 5, to give each student a role in that group. For example, you are the debugger. You are going to have your eyes on when the algorithm fails. You are the mechanical engineer. You're in charge of making sure the car starts and starts safely, and you understand why, not if there's ever a problem. and giving explicit roles, especially when you're in groups of 4 or 5. But I think it's possible in 4 or 5. The Bolt, same thing. We have the classroom pack, so they don't often have to share. So I don't know, Adrienne, if you have more of a suggestion for the Bolt, but I would say again, 4 is fine as long as people have explicit roles.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much right on for Bolt as well. I've seen it used in lots of different ways. 2, 3, 4. I think, yeah, once you get to 5, it starts to get a little repetitive, and there's not quite, there's one or two kids that don't quite have anything to do and aren't engaged. But I would say that's pretty accurate, everything you said for Indy.
Awesome, thank you. What time is it? I think we have time for a couple more. Which of our products are suggested for high school? Maybe Adrienne, you can take that one.
Oh, sure. I would say Bolt and Rover are definitely our biggest products that are used in high school. Both can be programmed with the draw block and text canvas, so they age up pretty nicely. So even if your students have experience with block coding, they can move on to the text coding canvas. And if they're new to programming, then the block canvas is really, really easy to pick up and still very, very powerful. Yeah, Bolt and Rover, I would say, are your best bets.
Yeah, and since we have a question also about 3rd grade, maybe we could just go through our suggested age ranges for our different robots and littleBits, but keeping in mind that you all know your students best, and we've seen people go beyond the boundaries of what we say. So
yeah, officially we say for Indy, because I just saw that pop up as well. Officially for Indy, we say K-2 is our recommended ages, but just like Cassie said, I've seen older kids have just as much fun with Indy as anyone in kindergarten through 2nd. And then Bolt, you can really start in Mini and Bolt, really, you can start in 3rd grade. Again, you can use that draw canvas, which is really, really easy to use, and you can start some simple block canvas stuff, and Bolt, like I said, can really age up all the way to high school, whereas Rover is really I would say our most aged up product right now. So you can kind of start with Rover about 6th grade to 12th grade. And then littleBits, again, we usually see them used in an upper elementary environment, but I've also watched adults have just as much fun with littleBits as 3rd graders, so they definitely can age up as well, especially if you have students that aren't as familiar with basic circuits. They're a really great hands-on way to learn about that. So.
Yeah, and yeah, Gail, Mini works for 3rd as well as Bolt, yeah, and even Indy. So
I just want to say I use Indy for a 3rd grade lesson that's super awesome, because building maps and map building is a 3rd grade standard. And so because the students have the knowledge of how to use Indy, they then have to create maps with keys and compass roses, and they have to set it up with the correct algorithm, and students travel around and have Indies travel through maps and then give feedback on their map building. So I think just as students progress in understanding Indy or one of the more basic robots or Bolt, it's just more important to think of how you can then add in different standards and things that continue to push their learning and thinking with that item.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll do one last question before the giveaway. If we didn't get to your question, I'll be sharing at the end how you can get in contact with us or Meaghan, so we can continue the discussion. But the last question is, love these design thinking question strategies. How do you utilize these tools to move students from generic challenges to content-based challenges?
I'm sorry, say that again, Cassie.
Oh, how do you utilize design thinking and the question strategies to move students from generic challenges to content-based challenges?
Well, if I understand the question correctly. I think that it's probably a little bit up to the teacher to help with that. So I think the generic questioning, like, hey, what assumptions did you make, is a really easy question to ask in any scenario. But again, say you're having you're programming Bolt to go through a maze, maybe that questioning is more, hey, what assumptions did you make about which path you were going to take through this maze? Were there multiple solutions? Was there only one solution? And so I think like in the questioning, you can kind of help go from generic to specific. And with content specific, say you're, using a lesson in, physics or ELA, I would say just creating those questions to address the content that you're trying to teach is probably the best way to do that.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm actually also going to post our robot comparison chart in the chat, just for people who want to see the differences between them. And littleBits isn't on that, but we generally recommend that for elementary school. Okay, very good. Let's move on to our giveaway. And let me go check who our winner was from our list of participants that joined us today. Looks like that is Janine J. Janine, congratulations. You're the winner. There you are. Janine, email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat to claim your Sphero Bolt or Sphero Indie, whatever you decide, and we'll get that out to you. Okay, I know we're at time here, but I just want to let everyone know of our upcoming webinar series, Cybersecurity 101. That's going to be a 3-part course. You'll get a badge at the end. More information to follow, but just want you to save the dates for now, starting next month, every Tuesday for 3 weeks. And then here's how you can contact us if you have any questions that we didn't answer. Here's Meaghan's Twitter and Instagram. I believe you said, Meaghan, that you're more active or you post more on Instagram, but you would definitely check messages on Twitter. And you can see we're Sphero on all of the social channels. So thank you again to our hosts for all of that amazing those amazing recommendations and all of the good conversation that it started. And thanks to everyone who participated for sharing what you know and for joining us. So we will see you next time. And again, this will be sent out in the coming days so that you can rewatch the webinar if you want, and you can access those slides. All right. With that, have a good evening, everybody. Thanks again. See you next time.
Good night.